This is not just a story. There are 3 different endings here: bad, neutral, and good. After the 2nd chapter, there is one fate. After the 4th, there is a completely different one. You decide for yourself which one is closer to reality. What happens when a major engineer refuses to start a war that hasn't been declared yet? The command sent him to a warehouse of decommissioned parts. What he built there changed the entire army, but no one was supposed to know about it. The Baltics, August 1939. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Not the kind of rain that soaks your coat. The kind that seeps into your bones, turns boots to sponges, and makes metal smell like blood. In a clearing near Daugavpils, Latvia, trucks sloshed through black mud. Soviet soldiers unloading crates marked tools in stenciled Cyrillic. But there were no tools in those crates, just Mosin Nagants, helmets, and silence. Major Sergei Antonovich Vlasenko stood beneath a sagging canvas canopy, his finger numb around a cigarette he wasn't supposed to be smoking. He lit it anyway. He always lit it when someone was watching. Vlasenko wasn't born for diplomacy. Broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, with a scar above his brow from a winter training mishap no one dared bring up. He wasn't political, but he had a brain. Worse, he had a conscience. The kind that didn't shut up when orders came from above. 2 hours earlier, his unit had intercepted a Lithuanian patrol just over the disputed border. The order from Moscow: de-escalate, do not fire, avoid incident. But the local NKVD officer, a snub-nosed brute named Mikhail Dobrotin, had other ideas. They step over the line, Dobrotin had said. They learn the cost. Vlasenko stopped the ambush himself, called it off, made the men stand down, gave the Lithuanians water and maps, let them walk. And now the silence was worse than the weather. You think you're smarter than the party, Comrade Major? Dobrotin's voice was low but sharp, slicing through the tent like a bayonet. He stepped in without knocking, and KVD never knocked. Soaked cap in hand, coat dripping. He didn't sit. He didn't need to. The man carried the full weight of Stalin's paranoia like a second spine. Vlasenko didn't flinch. I think bullets are a poor way to start friendships with countries we are about to annex. You gave aid to enemies. They're not enemies yet. Dobrotin smiled, a slow, oily grin. Not yet. But they will be, and when they are, people will remember who shook hands instead of loading rifles. This was the moment. Not a gunshot, not a battlefield. Just 2 men, soaked and cold, staring across the collapsing edge of a war that hadn't technically started. And still, Vlasenko knew. He had crossed a line. The truth was, something was coming. Rumors flew faster than trucks. Some whispered of a non-aggression pact with Germany. Others said the Red Army was preparing for a liberation campaign west of the Dnieper. The officers who asked questions disappeared or got reassigned to Kamchatka. Vlasenko had learned to listen with his eyes, and what he saw terrified him. The maps were changing, units were moving, and in the sealed red folders that landed on his desk, words like preemptive strike were no longer redacted. There were names, coordinates, bridges to blow, radios to cut. Targets, civilian and military. He wasn't reading drills. He was reading a war plan. A war before the war. That night, Vlasenko sat alone in the field office, coat over his shoulders, poring over the operation code named Jemchug. Pearl, a strike plan, not reactive, not defensive, offensive. Strike Germany first. Occupy East Prussia, push to the Vistula in 6 weeks, cut off Gdansk before the Wehrmacht could move. The plan smelled of confidence and desperation. Confidence in Soviet numbers, tanks, men, steel, Desperation in Stalin's eyes, beat Hitler to the punch, or be the nail beneath his hammer. And yet, no one spoke openly, because to speak was to vanish. Vlasenko didn't vanish. He did worse. He talked. The wrong room to speak in. At the Kovno command meeting, 4 days later, with Baltic theater commanders and political officers crowding a sweating, smoke-filled bunker, Vlasenko stood and said the one thing that would wreck his life. This isn't prevention, it's provocation. We're starting a war the people don't know exists. Silence. A kind of stillness that only comes when everyone in the room instantly realizes someone just lit a match inside a fuel depot. A colonel coughed. The major looked away. General Pototsky, an old cavalry relic who wore his 1919 medals like shields, slowly rose. "Comrade Vlasenko," he said evenly, "is it your position that the Central Committee is mistaken in its assessment of fascist threat?" "It is my position," Vlasenko replied, "that if we start this war on our terms, we'll still lose it on theirs." And that was it. No screaming, no gavel, just a nod from the political liaison, a note scribbled on a pad, and the quiet, creeping certainty that this moment would not be forgiven. Downward spiral. The punishment came not in handcuffs, but in paper. Vlasenko was reassigned, demoted to Logistics Command in eastern Belarus, a depot known for rusted rail lines, broken engines, and bureaucratic suicide. His replacement in the Baltics, a loyalist, not a strategist, not a thinker, a follower. The war machine rolled on. And yet, in the shadows of that demotion, Vlasenko found something strange. He wasn't alone. The warehouse men, in the maze of crates and cold engines at the Belarusian depot, he met engineers, quartermasters, radio technicians. All of them shuffled there for more important roles, all of them unreliable, all of them thinking. People like Tatyana Mirova, a mechanic's daughter turned aeronautical engineer, blacklisted after insisting the new MiG prototype had a fatal tail flaw. Like Lieutenant Haroun, a Crimean Tatar radio officer fluent in 4 languages, demoted for questioning Soviet cipher strategy. Like Yakov Belenko, an aging rail planner whose design for rapid bridge-building units had been shelved for being too Western. Misfits, cast-offs, brains without uniforms. Together, in secret, they started building something Moscow had never asked for, a new plan. Not for victory, for survival. The rot from above, meanwhile, orders became sloppier. Timelines rushed, fuel shipments mislabeled. Vlasenko saw it clearly now. The system wasn't ready for a war with Germany. Not in the fall of 1939. The roads were mud, the radios unreliable, the officers uncoordinated, and worst of all, the strategy was built on fantasy. Fantasy that the Wehrmacht would collapse under sheer weight of Soviet armor. But real war doesn't care about fantasy. And Vlasenko knew if Stalin pulled the trigger first, it wouldn't be victory. It would be catastrophe. But no one wanted to hear that. Every report he filed was either lost or rewritten. Every warning was diluted. And when he asked to speak directly with the front command, his request was denied. Twice. It was then that Vlasenko made the decision that would break him. If the truth won't go up the chain, we'll send it sideways. He and Mirova began assembling a ghost network of rail operators and field officers, people who could quietly move units, delay transports, fudge numbers, misfile coordinates. Not sabotage, just slow the machine long enough to buy time, to stop the strike, or at least blunt it. But time was not on their side. September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. But what no one expected, not in Berlin, not in London, not in Paris, was that the Soviets moved within 48 hours, not on the eastern half, on the western, into Prussia, into Warsaw, into war, and none of it was ready. Warsaw Front, November 1939. The first snow came early, a quiet kind, dusting over the wreckage like a lie. Under the pale light of dawn, Soviet tanks lay half buried in mud, their tracks frozen solid, hatches iced shut. The once gleaming armor of the Red Army now looked like grave markers scattered across the Polish plain. Inside one of them, a man's breath clouded against the glass. Major Sergei Vlasenko, face gaunt, eyes hollow, counted the seconds between the sounds of distant artillery. He didn't bother wiping the frost from the viewfinder anymore. There was nothing left to see, only ruin. The preemptive strike that Moscow had promised would save Europe from fascism had turned into something unrecognizable. The Germans hadn't collapsed. They had waited, bled the Soviet spearheads dry in the borderlands, then countered with precision, speed, and discipline no Soviet staff paper had accounted for. Stalin's gamble to hit Hitler first had turned the map inside out. The lines that were supposed to move west were now running backward, and Vlasenko, the man who'd tried to stop it, now commanded the fragments of a regiment that no longer existed on paper. The field hospital. The cold air inside the makeshift hospital smelled of iodine, smoke, and metal. Rows of cots lined an abandoned schoolhouse. Plaster hung from the ceiling like old skin. Nurses moved in silence. A phonograph somewhere played a scratchy waltz from a cracked record. It was supposed to lift morale. It only made things worse. Vlasenko sat by a cot, watching a young conscript breathe through blood-soaked gauze. The boy was 17, maybe younger. He still wore his school boots under his uniform trousers. His dog tags read Kovalenko, P.A. He had been one of the radio operators, caught when a fuel truck exploded behind the line. "Comrade Major," whispered the nurse, her hands shaking from exhaustion. "You should rest." He looked up. Her face was gray with soot. "What for?" he said quietly. "So I can dream about this again?" The nurse didn't answer. She turned away, adjusted another bandage, moved to the next cot. That was how everyone survived here, not by feeling less, but by showing less. Letters that never arrive. At night, Vlasenko wrote reports by candlelight. Not the kind Moscow wanted. No slogans, no victories. Just lists, numbers, conditions, names. How many were left? How many could still fight? He sent them through unofficial couriers, through old logistics contacts, hoping someone in the capital would read the truth before the censors drowned it. But the truth, like the soldiers, froze before it reached home. One letter came back, unopened, stamped in red. Returned, inconsistent with operative narrative. That phrase burned into his skull. Inconsistent with narrative. As if truth itself were a malfunction to be repaired. He tore the letter apart and tossed it into the stove. The fire didn't catch. The paper was too damp. The commissar arrives. When the black car rolled into the camp 2 days later, everyone froze. Its tires hissed on the ice. The insignia, red star inside a laurel wreath, meant one thing. The political department had come. Out stepped Commissar Dobrotin, the same man from the tent in Latvia, immaculate in his pressed coat, his expression carved from marble. He looked untouched by the winter, by the war, by anything human. Behind him, 2 aides carried briefcases. Not medicine, not food, paperwork. "Major Vlasenko," Dobrotin began, his voice smooth, deliberate. "You've made quite a name for yourself." "I try not to. Vlasenko said, standing. Indeed, you've filed unusual reports, questioned orders, altered supply routes, reassigned men without clearance. I kept them alive. That's not your job, Dobrotin replied calmly. Your job is obedience. Vlasenko said nothing. The sound of distant artillery filled the silence between them. Dobrotin stepped closer, brushing snow off his gloves. Moscow reads everything, you know, even what doesn't reach them. You think they don't see through your logistical delays? I thought they'd see the bodies first. The Commissar's expression didn't change. You're idealistic, Major. Dangerous, but idealistic. Men like you burn bright, and then burn out. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You'll be reassigned again. Rear echelon, Kalinin sector. Effective immediately. I won't leave my men, said Vlasenko quietly. They're not yours anymore, Dobrotin said, without looking back. They belong to history now. Collapse. The German counterattack began 2 nights later. Under the cover of a snowstorm, tanks moved like ghosts. Tracks muffled by powder, silhouettes swallowed by white. The Soviet lines, thin, exhausted, blind, cracked before sunrise. Vlasenko's regiment, what was left of it, fought from the basements of a bombed-out sugar refinery. The air smelled of molasses and smoke. Every wall rattled with the thump of shells. Men coughed black dust, fired through shattered windows, dragged ammunition crates across the floor until their fingers bled. No one gave orders anymore. They just acted. Survival had replaced strategy. When a mortar blast ripped through the east wall, Vlasenko was thrown into the corridor. His ears rang. The sound flattened into a long, high whine. He saw movement. Mirova, the engineer, pulling a wounded gunner by his collar. Her face streaked with soot, her eyes burning with focus. "We have to move," she shouted. "They're flanking the river." Vlasenko pushed himself up, grabbed her arm. No retreat order. She laughed bitterly. Then let's call it a mechanical malfunction. They ran. The bridge. The last bridge, over the Bug River, was supposed to be destroyed to prevent German pursuit. But the detonation charges were wired wrong. Miscommunication, bad fuses, frozen triggers. A convoy of refugees, women, children, wounded, was already crossing when the first Panzer shells struck the far bank. "Cut the wires!" Vlasenko yelled over the roar. "We hold it until they're across." Mirova was halfway under the bridge, hands red with frost, trying to reset the charges. "If we don't blow it, they'll roll right through. If we do blow it, they'll drown." She looked up at him, and for a second there was no rank, no ideology, just 2 people in the teeth of chaos, making a choice that history would never record correctly. She cut the wires. They held the bridge for 12 minutes. 12 eternal, choking, deafening minutes. Long enough for the last trucks to clear the span. Long enough for the sky to burn red from tracer rounds. When it was finally over, when the Germans pulled back to regroup, the snow was pink. Vlasenko walked the length of the bridge, every step crunching over frozen casings and silence. Mirova was gone. Back to paper. 2 weeks later, he arrived at the Kalinin depot as ordered. No escort, no ceremony. Just a rail yard covered in frost and the smell of diesel. Bureaucrats in heavy coats shuffled papers, stamped forms, shouted about fuel shortages. The war here looked like ledgers, not battlefields. Vlasenko was given an office with a broken window and a file cabinet full of reallocation reports. Each line on those reports meant men, dead, missing, reassigned, erased. He signed them all, because not signing was a faster death. But each night he wrote something else. In a small notebook hidden inside a loose floorboard, he wrote the truth. Dates, names, conversations, not for revenge, for record, for the day someone might actually care to read it. The Whisper Network. By December, whispers spread across the rear lines. Stalin was furious. The campaign was officially a limited victory, though no one could explain what that meant. Promotions were handed out to those who said the right things, prisons filled with those who didn't. Among the troops, a new phrase circulated: bitter, quiet, fatalistic. We saved the motherland from Hitler by giving him half of Europe. No one knew where it started. Maybe it began here, in Kalinin, between clerks who still remembered friends at the front. Maybe it was born in the hospitals, from the lips of men with no legs and too much time to think. Either way, it spread faster than propaganda could smother it. And through it all, Vlasenko remained a ghost, unpromoted, unpunished, unseen. That was worse than exile. It meant the system didn't even find him worth destroying. The photograph, one night, sorting through a pile of recovered effects, he found a damaged photograph. Burnt edges. A group of soldiers in summer uniforms, laughing, squinting at the sun. Mirova was there, hair tied back, holding a wrench. Beside her, the radio officer, Harun, grinning like a fool. For a long time he just stared. Then he folded the picture, slipped it into his pocket, and returned to the desk. A stack of forms waited. Requisitions, casualty adjustments, personnel optimization, each one erasing another piece of what had really happened. He dipped his pen, pressed it to the paper, and wrote not what they wanted but what he remembered. The bridge was held by people who believed more in each other than in the plan. Ashes. By spring, the snow melted, revealing what the winter had hidden. Wrecks, bones, rust, silence. The Soviet army called it a strategic stabilization. The Germans called it a containment victory. The people caught between called it what it was: ruin. Factories back home were already rewriting the story. Posters went up. Bright, heroic, dishonest. Songs were written, medals minted. The lie hardened into history before the truth even had a chance to breathe. And yet, somewhere in the endless ledger of war, buried in a nameless depot in Kalinin, a man kept writing. Because if no one recorded the ashes, someday someone would mistake them for snow. The first solution has failed. The hero has lost to the system. The price is human, but the story is not over yet. Now there is a second chance. What if Stalin had struck first in 1939? Would Europe have been saved, or would there have been nuclear war or endless chaos? If you're interested in such alternative twists of history, subscribe so you don't miss the sequel. Each chapter is not just what if, but a deep dive into choices, costs, and consequences. How do you think things would have turned out? Write in the comments. We read everyone, and your thoughts could set the direction for the next story. Kalinin Depot, February 1940. The war didn't stop. It just forgot how to speak. It no longer shouted in bulletins or posters. It whispered in rail schedules, in redirected convoys, in towns no longer marked on maps. By the start of 1940, the Soviet advance had stopped just west of Białystok. Not because of victory, because of logistics, frostbite, and what the General Staff called temporary overextension. Major Sergei Vlasenko sat at a desk buried in requisition forms, listening to pipes groan in the walls. The heating was down again. Somewhere above, boots echoed in the steel rafters. Another inspection. Every week brought one. Every week he was asked the same question. Why are your deliveries late? And every week he gave the same answer. Because you're feeding a machine that's broken its own legs. The compromise begins. The man who changed everything didn't arrive in a black car or wear polished boots. He walked in, coughing, with a face like a snowdrift and a jacket 2 sizes too big. Colonel Abram L. Mendelevich, recently reassigned from the Leningrad Artillery Bureau, had seen too much to care about protocol. "You're Vlasenko," he said, dropping his satchel on the desk. "You're early." "I'm freezing." He sat, lit a cigarette, and pulled out a folder. Inside, a map of railway spurs, airfields, repair yards. He tapped one spot repeatedly, a nameless siding near Orsha. "That's where we'll change the war," he said flatly. Vlasenko raised an eyebrow. "That's where they send rusted tank hulls to die." "Not anymore," Mendelevich replied. "We're turning it into a mobile assembly platform. Tanks built near the front. Fast. Modular. Off the books. You'll need miracle logistics. That's why I came to you. A new front. They called it the Echo Front. Unofficial, decentralized, and fueled by leftovers. While Stalin's generals argued over maps and speeches, Mendelevich and Vlasenko were gathering engineers from penal battalions, blacklisted mechanics, and dismissed Jewish technicians too unreliable for Moscow's doctrine, but too brilliant to waste. Tatiana Mirova had reappeared, barely alive, extracted by partisans weeks after the bridge standoff. She walked with a limp now, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She arrived in Orsha without ceremony, inspected the broken lathes, kicked a cracked transmission in disgust, and said, "We'll need 3 weeks, and no supervisors." "Just don't blow up the siding," Vlasenko muttered. "I'll only blow up the budget." They got to work. Behind camouflage nets and bogus paperwork, they began something unthinkable. They started fixing the war, not with slogans but with spanners. Resistance by functionality. They built what they called the Brat 40, a refitted BT-7 chassis with armored skirts and a redesigned short-barrel cannon. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't even legal by GAB-2 standards. But it worked. It turned, fired, ran cold. Most importantly, it could be repaired with parts salvaged from destroyed units. By March, the first batch rolled out, unmarked, undocumented, and unstoppable. Vlasenko rerouted them through sanitation trains to bypass approval channels. Officers in the rear thought they were latrine supplies. They were wrong. On the ground near Lublin, a shattered infantry unit, 134th Rifle, received 6 of the new tanks mid-engagement. Their commander, a short, skeptical lieutenant named Pavlenko, radioed back, "I don't know who sent these, but they turned the whole forest into a coffin. For the Germans. System retaliates. Success has a scent, and Moscow could smell something was off. In April, an investigation team arrived. 4 men in NKVD uniforms. Dry, polite, precise. Not overtly threatening. That was worse. They asked no accusatory questions. Instead, they interviewed mechanics, cross-checked invoices, inspected grease stains on manifests. Then they visited Vlasenko. "We've noticed irregularities," said the lead inspector, sipping tea from a chipped glass. "You'll have to be more specific," Vlasenko replied. "You have locomotives moving on unofficial timetables." "I reroute around Rex. Moscow still hasn't fixed the main line. You're producing unauthorized armored vehicles. They were prototypes, field evaluations. You falsified repair logs. I corrected them. They were wrong." The inspector smiled. "Your conviction is admirable, unusual, unpopular. He stood, set down his glass, and added casually, "You understand, of course, that patriotism without permission is treason?" Vlasenko nodded. "So, arrest me. We might, or we might not. Sometimes it's better to let the storm pass on its own." They left without another word. Too useful to erase. That was the system's genius. It didn't always shoot dissenters. Sometimes it let them burn out under weight. But this time the math didn't add up. The Echo Front was quietly stabilizing the entire southern sector. Divisions that had been crippled by supply failures were suddenly mobile again. Engineers, once condemned for wrongthink, were keeping artillery rolling, planes flying, radios clear. Even Politburo couldn't ignore results. They didn't approve the Echo Front, they simply stopped asking questions. The cost but victory, even partial, came with a cost. In May, Mendelevich collapsed at his drafting table, heart failure. He was 52. His funeral was held at night, under blackout curtains with no ranks on the coffin. Vlasenko delivered no eulogy. He just stood there, holding a wrench wrapped in cloth, the first prototype key. Tatiana took over design coordination. She hadn't spoken much since her return, but at the funeral she said quietly, "He never wanted a legacy, just a working gearbox. Recognition without name." One morning, a stack of documents arrived from GAB-2 headquarters, stamped, sealed, approved. They were reverse-engineered copies of the Brat 40 schematics. No credit, no mention of origin. Instead, a commendation was issued to a different unit for pioneering integration of field repair techniques. Vlasenko laughed when he read it. It wasn't bitter. It was inevitable. He showed the memo to his mechanics. Mirova rolled her eyes. Harun muttered something in Tatar. Then they all went back to work. Because at least now their machines were in motion, inside the silence. By summer, Vlasenko was no longer invisible, not famous, not rewarded, but consulted. Carefully worded memos now asked his insight on infrastructure flexibility. Logistics officers began requesting ORSHA pattern platforms without knowing where the name came from. Somewhere in the fog of bureaucracy, a file had been marked useful, non-repeatable. He existed, but without identity, like a shadow that had proved its function. It was a strange victory, and it came with a strange kind of peace. The last train on June 3rd, 1940, a telegram arrived. "Moscow requests consultation. Report to Smolensk Junction. Do not delay." He packed nothing, told no one. Mirova caught him by the platform, her face drawn, eyes searching. "Are you coming back?" "I doubt it," he said. "Then take this." She handed him a folded paper, a new schematic. Something elegant, something bold. He smiled. "I'll show it to someone," he said. "You'll show it to everyone." The train pulled away into fog. He was alone again, but not defeated. Echoes. The Echo Front faded as quietly as it had formed. By winter, it was folded into the general structure, its parts absorbed, its minds reassigned. But the machines kept moving. The soldiers kept fighting. And somewhere in the rust and wire, the memory of what happened in Orsha lingered. Not a revolution, not a rebellion, a correction, born in frost. Paid for in silence, sustained by people who refused to give up, even when the system gave up on them. Smolensk, June 1940. The train hissed to a stop like it was exhaling the dead. No announcer called the station, no porters. Just wind and the creak of empty rails. Major Sergei Vlasenko stepped down alone, boots hitting cold iron. His coat, too thin for the morning fog, flapped against his legs like it was trying to escape with him. The platform was abandoned. At the edge of the track stood a man in an officer's cap and civilian scarf. Colonel Lev Konstantinovich Varadin, People's Commissariat of Transport. Face narrow, knuckles swollen, eyes that blink too much. "Comrade Vlasenko?" "Depends who's asking." Varadin smiled without humor. "I am the man who read your files and didn't burn them." They shook hands like men who didn't trust each other, but couldn't afford not to. The war goes on. But differently from Smolensk to Bryansk, from Bryansk to Gomel, the trains rolled again. Fewer derailments, fewer shortages. Ammunition arrived ahead of schedule. Fuel lines extended into zones no one thought reachable. Units once written off were now punching holes back into eastern Poland. The front was stable, not victorious, stable. In official bulletins, the phrase was repeated like a prayer. Operational continuity achieved through innovation and sacrifice. They never named the people who'd made it happen, but they named the results. Vlasenko watched all this from behind the tinted windows of the Commissariat's new logistics headquarters. They gave him a room, a secretary, a new coat. He hated all of it. The paradox of promotion. His new rank, lieutenant colonel, came with no ceremony. Just a file slipped across a polished desk and a nod from a superior who didn't bother standing up. "You've been assigned to the Central Implementation Directorate," said the clerk, barely 25, wiping his glasses with a ration slip. "Your innovations are now policy." "I didn't ask for that." "No one did," the clerk replied, "but someone's got to carry the flag." Vlasenko stared at the packet. His design specs, the Brat 40, the field track rework, even the Ghost Depot map from Orsha, now stamped with red seals and republished as official doctrine. Rewritten, reattributed, sanitized. "I wrote rapid modular adaptation. You changed it to frontline opportunism." The clerk shrugged. "The phrasing polls better." The ghost engineers. He tracked them down one by one. Tatiana Mirova, reassigned to a state design bureau in Sverdlovsk. She now oversaw fuselage testing on transport aircraft. Her limp had worsened. The lab still didn't give her a chair. "I got a plaque," she said, sipping tea from a tin cup. "Didn't say why." "Do you regret it?" he asked. She thought for a long time. "I regret that I know how it'll be told, that some museum will say the right men solved the wrong war with perfect timing. I regret that part." Yakov Belenko, the rail architect, had been moved to a regional council in the Urals. He now taught corrective logistics to junior officers. His diagrams, brilliant, sprawling, had been redrawn in cleaner lines by men who didn't understand them. "They teach my methods like I invented bread," he muttered, lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled. "And still no one listens when I say the flour's full of gravel." He handed Vlasenko a note, torn from a ledger. "You didn't fix the war. You made it harder to lie about, that's better." Recognition that never lands. In October, a Moscow newspaper ran a double-page spread titled "Innovation at the Edge," the men behind the machines. Vlasenko's name appeared, once misspelled. His photo didn't. Instead, they printed a painting of a faceless tank crew planting a Soviet flag on a pile of wreckage. Bright sky, no mud, no blood. It wasn't even the right tank model. His secretary congratulated him. The ceremony. By winter, the Central Committee invited him to speak at a closed forum on strategic supply advancement. The hall in Moscow was gold-lined, cavernous, and sterile. Rows of uniforms with polished medals stared blankly as Vlasenko stood at the podium. He wore his best coat, not because he cared, but because optics mattered now. He spoke for 15 minutes. Clear, direct, mechanical. He thanked units he hadn't commanded, described operations he hadn't approved, quoted data from reports that had erased his name. At the end, they applauded. When he stepped down, someone offered him champagne. He declined. He preferred his lies dry. The private collapse. Later that night, in the hotel room they assigned him, polished floor, no locks on the windows, he stared at the ceiling for hours. He didn't feel triumph or rage, just the weight. He had won. His designs were saving lives. His methods were used in real operations. His refusal to obey bad orders had carved a fracture in the machine that others were now able to slip through. And yet, he was alone. The people who mattered to him were gone, scattered across bureaus and forgotten towns. His story was public property, distorted, laundered, archived under names that had never held a wrench. Even the letter he once received from his brother, missing since the first German push, had been censored before it reached him. Half the words were black ink. He couldn't even read grief without permission. The letter that did arrive. Weeks later, a parcel came, no return address. Inside, a folded engineer's blueprint, detailed, hand-drawn, precise. It was Mirova's design, the one she gave him on the train, but this time it was stamped. Approved for mass production, model TMS-41, chief designer T. Mirova. He stared at the stamp. Then at the bottom corner, a tiny penciled line barely visible. Tell the story yourself, or they'll write it for you. A quiet decision. That night he didn't write a report. He wrote a letter. Not to a superior, not to a publication, to a field officer he had never met. Commander of a new logistics unit near the Carpathians. Someone just beginning to fight the same invisible war. He included no advice, just 3 things. A list of people worth listening to, a blueprint stamped unofficial, field-tested, and a single sentence. Don't wait for applause. Just fix what you can before the snow falls. The official ending. In the months that followed, his name was floated for a position at Stavka. He declined. Instead, he requested reassignment to the Central Repair Division near Kursk. A factory, mud-thick rail yard, and depot swarming with conscripts, smoke, and real problems. The kind he could actually solve. They approved the transfer. No one protested. The story they told was that he'd retired from the strategic level to focus on training the next generation. The truth was, he didn't want a statue. He wanted a socket wrench. Final image. By the time the spring thaws came in 1941, the system had settled. The chaos of the first strike had hardened into dogma again. But now, beneath it, there were cracks. Good ones, places where field commanders used modified patterns with a wink, where requisitions were quietly adjusted based on what the railmen said, not what the officers wanted. Somewhere, quietly, the machine had changed. Just enough. Not a victory, not a loss, a bruise that healed wrong, but healed. And somewhere, in a snow-flecked yard near Kursk, a man in a gray coat lifted an engine hatch, pointed to the line, and taught a young mechanic how to spot the weak weld before it failed. No speeches, no headlines, just hands in the grease, and silence filled with meaning. It was the second denouement. The victory was partial. The hero was recognized, but too late. What if things had turned out differently? Ahead lies the third path. Kursk Repair Depot, Number 9, March 1941. It was the kind of cold that made steel hum. Rows of T-26 hulls sat gutted on concrete slabs, their engines half-ripped, wires hanging like tendons. Steam hissed from cracked radiators. Welding sparks lit up the dark corners like short-lived stars. The air smelled of oil, vinegar rags, and the burnt skin of gloves pressed too close to metal. Colonel Sergei Vlasenko walked between the rows in silence, coat open, clipboard forgotten under his arm. He didn't inspect like an officer. He watched like an engineer. He knelt beside bolts, touched weld seams, whistled when he found a crack misaligned by half a centimeter. "You see that," he said, pointing to the fuel line bracket. The young mechanic beside him squinted. "What's wrong with it?" "It's been rebent twice. Stressed like that's a countdown. Replace it." "But we're out of—" "Then build one." The boy blinked. "With what?" Vlasenko stood, patted his shoulder. "Whatever you've got. That's how the last war was won." This wasn't just another depot. Something had shifted in Depot 9. There were no posters here, no marching songs, no chalkboard slogans, no unquoted Pravda. But for the first time in months, maybe years, people worked like they believed it mattered. Because here, truth was louder than paperwork. The arrival of the real war one morning in mid-April, a convoy limped in from the west. Trucks coated in mud, turrets tarped in torn canvas. Inside the beds, damaged BT-7s, burned-out KV-1s, and something new. Unfamiliar tread patterns, fresh weld lines, hastily rebranded serials. They weren't just damaged, they were wrong. "Where'd these come from?" Vlasenko asked the lieutenant in charge of the transport. The young officer shrugged. "Special units. No paperwork. Just told to bring them here, fix them fast, send them east." "East where?" "Didn't say, but they didn't look like training tanks. They looked used." That was the first sign. Then came the engineers, transferred without warning. Faces from Orsha, Mirova's people, displaced artillery designers, a cryptographer with frostbite scars, each one assigned to rear support operations, each one knowing that wasn't true. Whatever was coming wasn't official yet, but it was real, and it was big. A new alliance. They gathered that night in the tool shed, lit by a single acetylene lamp. Vlasenko, Tatiana Mirova, flown in from Sverdlovsk under a fake name. Captain Lev Harun, reassigned from Signal Intelligence, now in overalls, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Dr. Pavel Remezov, formerly of the Red Army Medical Research Bureau, labeled a civilian adjunct, now field testing track stability under freezing conditions. All exiles, all discarded by the machine, but now something was different. Harun placed a folder on the bench. Inside, intercepted transmissions, coded orders, supply manifests for a buildup that wasn't supposed to exist. "Stavka's scared," he said. "They're prepping the western front lines under total blackout. Troop surges, mobile depots, not defense, positioning." Mirova lit a cigarette. "So we're doing this again. Another preemptive security initiative." "No," Vlasenko said, voice low. "Not this time." He opened his own folder. Schematics, engine flow redesigns, field repair tables. "This time, we move first. On our own terms." The plan. They weren't trying to stop the war. They were trying to keep it from being lost in the first 10 days. The plan was called Raingut. Not a military operation, a logistics hack. They rerouted repair chains into flexible micropods. Mobile teams of 3, each equipped with convertible rail crates, portable welders, and generator bikes. They embedded engineers inside infantry supply columns. They built collapsible forges to fix tank parts in forests. They created underground fuel caches disguised as school heating bunkers. They redrew regional rail maps using local workers, not Moscow projections. And it worked. Slowly, quietly. One depot after another began breathing again. friction with success came attention, and resistance. An official from the Central Logistics Bureau arrived unannounced. Director Voynov. Clean coat, stiff hat, walking like the floor belonged to him. "I see you've taken certain liberties," he said, surveying the yard. Vlasenko didn't stop moving. "I've taken responsibility. That's more than most. This operation violates 12 protocol statutes and cuts delivery time by 3 days." Voynov pursed his lips. "You're assuming that the system approves of your methods." Vlasenko turned to him, eyes calm. "I'm assuming the system wants to survive." The director didn't answer. Public exposure. In May, a twist no one expected. A war correspondent from Izvestia, assigned to cover industrial morale, arrived at Depot 9. A woman named Polina Serebriakova. Sharp eyes, sharp tongue. She wasn't looking for a story. She was looking for the truth. She followed Vlasenko for 3 days, watched the rebuilds, interviewed the mechanics, took photos not of ceremonies but of bruised hands, of grease under fingernails, of officers welding beside privates. Her article, when it came, didn't mention him by name, but it carried weight. The war behind the war, how mechanics are holding the line. Circulation, 1.8 million copies. Morale spike, measurable. Command reaction, mixed. The crack in the ceiling. Weeks later, an encrypted cable arrived. From Stavka Strategic Unit 3 to Depot 9, Vlasenko. You are hereby instructed to brief the General Logistics Council on modular reinforcement protocols. Your efforts have been noted. Continue. 3 words at the bottom. Report freely. Speak truth. He stared at the page for a long time. The war had not changed, but something inside the machine had. Legacy in real-time Depot 9 became the first to implement modular continuity doctrine. It wasn't doctrine. It was desperation turned into design. Field reports changed tone. Commanders requesting Vlasenko boxes, coded kits with schematics, tools and replacement algorithms. Engineers now taught sergeants to fix wiring on the move. Mechanics received stripes. Even Haroun got a new rank, captain, reactivated, though he still refused to salute unless there was actual fighting nearby. Before the hammer falls one evening in early June, Vlasenko climbed the watch platform overlooking the southern track. The sun bled low over the horizon. Tank silhouettes glinted in orange light. Far off he saw kids running beside the fence, laughing, chasing a wheelbarrow like it was a tank. Mirova joined him. "They're building something new in Minsk," she said. "Composite armor, lightweight, ugly, but fast." "War's coming," he said. "It's already here." He turned to her. "This time, maybe we're ready." She lit a cigarette. "Not ready, just less unready." He smiled. The quiet triumph. For the first time in 2 years, Vlasenko felt something close to peace. Not because the war was won, not because he was safe, but because he no longer fought alone. The system hadn't changed because it wanted to. It had changed because it had no other choice. And when it did, it found people like him, stubborn, scarred, unafraid, already moving forward. No medals, no parades, just functioning engines. And a battlefield where, this time, the wheels might not come off by day 3. Kursk, July 1941. The sun was too bright for a country at war. Light danced across the factory yard, catching on cranes, steel plates, drying uniforms. The dust shimmered like heat waves, and the clank of hammers echoed like a language older than radio. Every hour another engine turned over. Another vehicle came to life. But Lieutenant Colonel Sergei Vlasenko wasn't watching machines anymore. He stood in the shade of the admin tower, coat off, sleeves rolled, oil under his fingernails. In one hand, a file. In the other, a letter, both unsigned. He reread the letter again. You have permission to lead. Do not wait for approval. The system will follow when it has no choice. No stamp, no seal, just truth. And it was enough. The war had reached them, but not broken them. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the shock reverberated like a thunderclap through every department, office, and field kitchen. But not here. Depot 9 didn't panic. It accelerated. By July 5th, they'd already refit 38 damaged tanks. By July 10th, they'd supplied 9 mobile bridge teams to the retreating army. By July 15th, their modular repair crates were in every front sector west of Bryansk. The same generals who once mocked Vlasenko's field kits were now asking for more. Not orders, not blueprints. Just the same question, over and over. How the hell did you make it work? And his answer never changed. We listened to the people holding the wrenches. The unexpected return of an enemy. On the 18th, a car arrived. Black. Official. Tires clean. No dust. From it stepped a man Vlasenko hadn't seen since the Baltics. Mikhail Dobrotin. Still in uniform. Still silent. But older now. His boots scuffed. Eyes heavier. They stood for a long moment in the shadow of the gate. 2 men. 1 war. Thousands of ghosts between them. You're not surprised to see me? Dobrotin asked. I'm not surprised by anything anymore. You're not going to ask why I'm here? Vlasenko shrugged. I already know. He led him inside. The confrontation that wasn't in the central yard. Dobrotin watched as a teenage girl rolled a barrel of fuel toward a T-34 chassis. She was maybe 16. Uniform too big. Determined. She part of your labor union now? He asked dryly. She's the reason that engine won't stall at Smolensk, Vlasenko replied. They walked in silence for a while. I read about your units, Dobrotin said finally. They don't report like the rest. No missing quotas, no falsified recoveries, no burnt-out engines. That's because we don't build on lies anymore. Dobrotin nodded slowly. He didn't argue. Then, they sent me to take control of the transition effort. Merge your systems into Central Command's doctrine. Vlasenko's jaw tightened. Meaning what? Meaning I can kill your program, or protect it. Pause. Long, measured. I want you to teach me how to run it. Transformation has a face. Now, for 3 weeks, they worked together. Not as friends, not as equals, but as men who had both lost too much to pretend anymore. Dobrotin, once the boot of ideology, now sat beside engineers listening, taking notes, asking real questions. He studied supply chains, repair logs, inventory math. He learned why you never overload a mobile repair unit, why spare bolts matter more than slogans, why the real front line wasn't always where the guns were, and when a rail supervisor demanded 2 engineers be replaced for insufficient political literacy, Dobrotin, of all people, barked, If you can fix a broken track at night with a lamp and 2 fingers, I don't care if you read Marx upside down. That was the moment it was real. Not policy, not doctrine. Change. The broadcast on August 3rd, a broadcast aired across the Western Front. Red Army modular response units have reduced equipment failure by 47%. Field engineers report record recovery speed. Mobile repair capacity up 200% since May. No names, no photos. But the voiceover ended with a phrase that made Vlasenko stop in his tracks. The soul of victory isn't in command, it's in function. Only 3 people ever used that line. He didn't smile. He just turned back to the turbine he was inspecting, tapped the casing and said, "Too tight. Loosen it half a turn." The letter that meant everything on the desk that night lay another envelope. This one with handwriting. Blue ink. Careful. From Polina Serebriakova, the war correspondent. Inside, a photo, black and white, faintly blurred. A girl, smiling, covered in grease. Behind her, a depot wall with chalk letters. Good engines don't ask for permission. She'd taken it without telling him, and mailed it when she saw the front begin to turn. He hung it on the door, not as pride, as proof. Recognition that mattered. On August 12th, General Headquarters formally adopted the Depot 9 Protocol as part of the Strategic Continuity Directive. 4,000 field kits ordered. 35 instructors dispatched to replicate the model. Depot 9's methods became standard, but more importantly, the people who built it stayed in charge. Mirova, now colonel, oversaw Eastern logistics. Harun became chief of ciphered supply routing. Belenko, the quiet rail planner, published the first ever unofficial field manual, now printed in every frontline warehouse. And Vlasenko? He stayed where he was. Final conflict, a visit from the past. One last visitor came that fall, Colonel Varadin, the same thin bureaucrat who'd once recruited Vlasenko with half-truths and veiled threats. This time, no scarf, no posturing, just a folder. "I've been promoted," he said flatly. "Deputy Director of Logistics Oversight." "Congratulations," Vlasenko replied without warmth. "I'm not here to inspect. I'm here to ask for help." That stopped him. Varadin opened the folder. Inside, projections, new fronts, unstable routes, gaps no one could fill. "I need you to audit us. From the inside. Tear it all apart. Make it work. Again." Silence. Then Vlasenko leaned back, cracked his neck, and said, "If I do this, we do it my way. No slogans, no medals, just steel, grease, and people who aren't afraid to say no to stupid." Varadin nodded. "That's why I came." The final scene. That winter, on the edge of the depot, children sledded down piles of unused tires. Snow fell in soft sheets, covering weld marks and footprints. Inside the hangar, a team of engineers gathered around a new prototype. Not because someone ordered it, not because it was in a manual, because it was right. Vlasenko walked past them, hands in pockets, face tired, posture relaxed. Someone called after him, "Colonel." He turned. They held up a wrench. He took it, tested its weight. Then, quietly, like it was nothing, he said, "Let's make something that doesn't break this time." And they did. Not for glory, not for ideology, but because a good engine keeps moving, even when the road ends.